Welcome to Into the Mind of Gen Z, a podcast where I take a look at scientific studies discussing the unique challenges and identity shifts that Gen Z goes through and what the science says about how it affects our mind. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're going to be hopping right into the topic because it's really exciting. This is actually one of the topics that's really, really close to me because when I chose to study psychology, a big part of it was because I was really interested in social relationships. And of course, that includes romance and dating. I think that romance and dating is really, really interesting because when you look at romance in general, it's kind of posited as this really major reason for us to be alive. Starting a family or at least having a partner, it's usually seen as a major goal, and that bleeds really deeply into our culture. You look at things like dances, songs, traditions, holidays, and all of these things, love is really encapsulated. And at this age, a lot of us are also considering getting into a relationship. For some of us, that means considering long term implications of those relationships, but also some of us might be getting out of them and evolving and changing. So, in this episode, I want to talk about some of the really interesting research on Gen Z and how this generation seems to be approaching the dating world. So, what does the dating landscape look like? How can you find or maintain healthy relationships? And also, what are the unique challenges of our current dating culture? So, that goes to things like online dating, swipe based apps, and much more. So, if that excites you, stay tuned as we dive into the mind of Gen Z. Probably one of the biggest elephants in the room is going to be, what does the data say about dating apps and hookup culture? Well, I'm happy that we have a lot of answers, and I actually think that a lot of them are going to surprise you because they surprised me. So, dating apps are obviously a very nuanced subject because they have their own pros and cons. Obviously, the most major benefit is that you are on a dating app. And so you're on an app and you're in an environment basically that allows you to connect with similar minded people who are looking to date. But also, that doesn't mean that you're going to find someone who is going to date like you are. Some people prefer to look for something casual. Some people might be just trying to date around and discover themselves. Other people might be looking for something long term. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But that just kind of goes to show you how nuanced relationships and dating in general can be. If you're misaligned on any of those things I just mentioned, once you enter the relationship, then that relationship might not last because you guys just don't have the same long term goals. And that doesn't even count for things like values, beliefs, and also all the other things that make relationships so whole and unique. Dating apps have also really broken down this culture of how we are able to find and think about a good partner, and also what a good partner means. And what I mean by that is, think about the people that you had crushes on back in school. You probably got your first impression of them by looking at them and saying, oh, this person's cute. Oh, this girl's kind of pretty. But that's really as far as it would go. I'd say probably 80, 90% of the time, you really don't know that much about them. Although you can guess, you don't have the numbers behind their height, their weight, their ethnicity, and you absolutely don't really know the things that they like, what they don't like, their passions, what they do for work, and all of these other factors. But on dating apps, it compartmentalizes all of these things into maybe 5 seconds at most of comprehension. And the issue is that it means when it comes to dating and using dating apps specifically, you're kind of trying to hit this checklist for them to being able to fulfill your needs. Oh, because I can see their stats, they have to be 6 foot. They need to wear less makeup. Oh, they look bad in this photo. Maybe they don't like the same things that I do when I look at their dating profile. It goes to this point where now that there's so much reach that we have when we use dating apps and it's so easy to see people, at least on a surface level, you don't really want to settle for anything. In fact, this is one of the issues when you use the internet to date in general, because now that you have access to everything and you almost want to optimize your relationship, you'd rather swipe to the next person who might be able to hit all of those checkboxes for you and is the quote unquote best fit. If that hits home for you, that isn't to say that you should necessarily drop your standards or that you shouldn't expect the best from your partner, but you should recognize that a lot of the traits you might be looking for in a partner, especially in regards to building a successful long term relationship, are by and large irrelevant to what you see on a dating profile. We'll talk a little bit more about what those meaningful traits are later, though. Now, getting into the science, research by Holtzhausen and others found that swipe based dating apps, so a majority of them like Hinge, Tinder, and Bumble, actually increase distress, anxiety, and depression levels. And greater frequency of using those dating apps further increases that anxiety and depression. They didn't get to explore the exact patterns of swipe based dating apps and why they might cause distress, but I'll give you an anecdote from one of my friends who uses them, which I think matches pretty well. So she told me that one of the main things is that when you're swiping left, which for people who don't use dating apps like me means that you're rejecting somebody, you also know that a lot of people out there are also swiping left on you. That sucks because you know that you're getting rejected. And Hinge even says in their research that 95% of the people that use their app are afraid of rejection. Being afraid of rejection is completely normal, but the issue is that when you swipe right and match with somebody, there's a really big gain to your self esteem now because now that you suddenly match with somebody, it feels really good. And that just makes the dating apps a lot more addictive. In psychology, we would refer to this as variable reinforcement. Because you don't know when you get the reward, which is matching with someone, it gets a lot more addicting once you get that reward. And inversely, it makes you feel a lot worse when you don't get it because you're really addicted to that high. There's such a deep canyon between the lows of a dating app and the highs of the dating app that it keeps you bouncing back because you'll never know when you get that high. But this is also where the research starts to get really, really juicy. So far, I've been talking about dating apps and the research behind it, but I also want to take a step back and actually talk about online dating as an entire topic, because I think that's where it actually gets really, really good. So, according to the research by Rosenfield and others, around 55% of the couples in the United States have currently met through online means, which means that they first got to know each other through online interactions. But it gets a lot more interesting because, again, in the US, only around 3 in 10 adults have said that they use dating apps specifically. Even just taking this population, that means that there's maybe 25% of people who are finding each other online, but not through dating apps. And so that genuinely means a huge portion of people who meet each other to date online aren't actually meeting through dating apps at all. They're meeting by basically pure coincidence, and that ends up leading to a relationship. This is super, super interesting to me because it implies how important true, genuine online interactions can be. And even for me, it resonates for me a lot because I've never used a dating app and I also don't really plan on using one. But my last relationship did start online. It started from an online interaction, which just was really from pure coincidence, and we connected with each other through mutual friends. The data gets even more interesting. And I'm sorry because we're going to be going through a lot of numbers, but hear this. Only 21% of dating app users in 2023 were of age 18 to 29, according to Statista. That means maybe around 20% or less of all dating app users are actually in Gen Z. And Forbes also found that almost 80% of Gen Zers who use dating apps report dating app burnout. And what's happening is that people are actually making the active choice to step away from dating apps in our generation. Women are a little bit more prone to this, but men obviously as well. People are generally seeing that dating apps are not really a good means to find a partner who's meaningful and actually connects you with the world. Even though we are the digital natives, Gen Z seems to be less inclined to be using dating apps as a means to finding partners than you might think. A larger majority of Gen Z is actually straying away from hookup culture. And when we date online, it's actually usually due to things like shared hobbies, games, or social groups that allow us to connect with others when we're online. I also think this makes a lot of sense because even when I take a look at things like my friends and their partners, people usually met online first. But that's just because maybe they had a shared class in a school group chat, or they met online in a club, or maybe they just played games with each other. Often in these scenarios, meeting online is just a proxy for making a friend who they eventually hang out with and start dating. I will say that these stats are also probably pretty likely more exacerbated by COVID-19 and the pandemic because, obviously in the pandemic, you had to start most of your relationships online in the first place because of social distancing. So even if you weren't planning to date, You probably made a lot of friends online, and one of them just inevitably led to a relationship. And it's so important because a lot of these online dating stats actually have nothing to do with dating apps at all. They're just genuine bonds and connections that you create that just aren't face to face and they're online instead. However, there is, of course, research on how this generally affects your relationships and also your relationship satisfaction. Being completely online with someone is very difficult because of things like physical intimacy. Intimacy is a really important part of your romantic relationships. While sex is obviously something that most people think of when they think about physical intimacy, even if you're someone who's on the side of asexuality or you're not really into that, things like cuddles, hugs, and kisses all are also things that kickstart the really important neurochemicals like oxytocin, and those things develop feelings of safety, bonding, and trust. In turn, that means that without that physical intimacy, you lose out on some aspects of the relationship. You really want to launch all of those wonderful bonding neurochemicals. And especially if you don't have a timeline on how you two might be able to meet or be together for the long term, then it can hinder your bond to each other. That said, if you're able to close the distance over time, that's how you really get the benefits of online dating, which is obviously a broader pool of people to meet. And you also get that benefit of physical intimacy. In fact, one of the benefits of online dating is that because you can't interact physically for a while, the delay of any sexual behaviors may actually improve the quality and satisfaction of the relationship. Researchers say that this is just because sex becomes less of an impulsive desire and instead is done based on feelings of emotional intimacy and connection, which in turn improves the quality of the relationship. There's also interesting findings on couples who meet online and date or marry for the long term, and how they generally have good relationship satisfaction, but lower than those who meet offline. It's not by a significant amount, but researchers at the University of Western claim that this might have to do with the stigma around how people met online. And so, kind of what I mean by that is it's a lot easier to say that you met your partner at school or at work than it is to say that, oh, I found them on Hinge or I found them on a game of Valorant. There is a genuine stigma around these things, whether it be from your parents, your family, or even jokingly your friends. People around you can make you feel like your relationship is lesser because of how you met, and that in turn can impact how you see your own relationship. Obviously, again, online relationships do work and many show high relationship satisfaction, but this stigma is one factor that might reduce satisfaction for relationships that start online. One last thing on online relationships is that when we look at long distance relationships, these again can absolutely work, but it's a very person to person thing. Long distance relationships require both parties to be people who are secure in themselves. And so the first level is that both parties and their level of anxiety has to be at a level of independence where both of them are their own person, they have their own lives, and they're comfortable being alone. But the second thing is that they also shouldn't be very avoidant. And so what that means is that hopefully this long distance partner is someone who is choosing you. They make the time for you and they're willing to commit to the relationship even when things get hard. Long distance relationships are probably the hardest kind of online spurred relationships because it creates physical distance, which can easily lead to emotional distance. Both parties need to be willing to commit to long term goals together. And if someone can't seem to talk about their future plans, maybe if they avoid the topic or if they're afraid of the commitment, then they probably just don't have the emotional maturity to be into a romantic relationship with you. So that was a really, really big chunk about the online dating scene and dating apps. But let's take a step back and review. We now know that Gen Z doesn't seem to be on dating apps that much. And even though a lot of us spend our time online, it's not like all of us are really chronically online. And at the very least, I really, really doubt that people genuinely spend their time playing games and scrolling on Twitter, and they expect that those things are the things that are going to find them love. So, where is everyone actually finding dates? Well, the research says that yes, Gen Z is taking matters into their own hands and touching grass. So, a report by Axios and Generation Lab in 2023 found that 79% of Gen Z and college students are foregoing dating apps. Part of the rejection of hookup culture is that people in Gen Z are really tired of meeting and talking to people online, and they want to start cultivating face to face relationships. Gen Z actually kind of has this primal urge, and they know that face to face relationships are things that can't be replaced. And so they're going out to actually genuinely meet people in places that they find their interests in. So if you're thinking about entering a relationship, but honestly, even if you're not, it's really time for you to start going out and start doing things that you might enjoy. Go dancing, join a choir, do pottery. Apparently, the really, really popular ones to meet people are climbing gyms and running clubs. But, you know, that's not the point. It's that more people than ever in Gen Z are continuing to go out and meet each other. You should join the wave of doing that too. Obviously, this doesn't mean that joining hobby clubs is going to be the thing that finds you a partner, but the good news is that if you're worried about finding people your age, then you probably shouldn't worry about it too much because Gen Z in general seems to just be getting out and doing things more. COVID, again, probably had a role to play with this, but people are seeing the genuine value of seeing each other face to face and especially in new spaces. Now, all of that is great. And hopefully, if you go do these things, maybe you will find a partner that cares for you and has similar interests. But also, if you've been dating or are thinking about dating, or in my case, you've seen your friends try dating, is that you also might feel like the dating scene in our generation is a little bleak. And I'll even give a couple of examples. So, things like the Red Pill Sigma community, the Incel community, the Femcel community, this culture around ghosting, and what just seems to be a more extreme personality landscape in general, not even just dating. Not only can it make it feel like it's really hard to date people, but it can also feel like when you do find someone who is even remotely acceptable, there's sometimes a reluctance or an unavailability for people to be in relationships in general. And sometimes that doesn't even mean emotional unavailability, which can be the case, obviously, with a lot of people. But also, some people just have a complete and total lack of desire to be in a relationship in the first place. Research actually backs this up too. So, it's a 100% real experience that our generation is just not as interested in seeing other people romantically right now. Gen Z is so far the generation that is the least interested in dating. So we have data from the American Survey Institute that reported that 56% of Gen Z did not date during their teen years, and this is compared to 78% of boomers and 76% of Gen X. So right now, we are much less inclined to dating. And when you take a look at the reasons why, the biggest one is just because it's not a priority for them. From the Survey Center on American Life, 73% of Gen Z says that they have more important priorities right now than a relationship. Researchers suggest that technology might have a role to play in it because it results in us being more passive in our lives as it replaces in person interactions. But the biggest reason is just because people are trying to prioritize their own livelihood and their own lives instead of dating. Individuals would rather focus on things that are more reliable and also seemingly serve their future more, like their career. Moreover, it also feels better for people to enter relationships when they have more stability. So, when they feel like they have a purpose, they have a home, and they have their finances in check, people feel like that this is going to be a better time to date than when they don't. Over 60% of Gen Z reports financial worries, and over 70% report worries about finding purpose. And those are the things that are going to take priority for them. This is kind of an issue though, because early dating also teaches you a lot. It teaches you how to communicate with somebody, it teaches you how to compromise, how to make plans, how to express your emotions properly, and in general, how to love. Dating is a really, really important part of our lives, and it's an important gem of the world, and also really integral to your social growth. Frankly, a lot of relationships that happen in our early years, so when we're a teenager, don't make it the way through. So I believe it's only about 2% of high school relationships and 28% of college relationships that last until marriage. But even then, those relationships are typically what lay the seeds for a fantastic relationship down the line because they're so educational. Relationships that end aren't failures. They're just setbacks for the future, and the saying often goes that it's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. It is a pretty bleak outlook if you're a hopeless romantic or if you're looking to date. But it's a really unique situation because there's not really a right answer here. Unfortunately, with the world being how it is, focusing on your money, your career, and your future is just really, really important. And sometimes doing those things does mean that you need to shed other things, like romantic relationships that aren't aiding to your growth, or if you feel like some of your relationships won't allow you to live the life that you want to live. It's important to recognize that a majority of us from our teens to mid 20s also still have a lot of mental, intellectual, and emotional growth to be done. People might need to be single or explore the world on their own or have the appropriate growth by just living by themselves so that they can be a better partner in the future. While we're on the topic of being single, I think this is also a good time for me to mention and try to destigmatize being single. I think, again, because of how romance bleeds into our everyday lives, it feels like we need a relationship, but it's a good time to remember that being single is really good and healthy. In fact, in the Forbes Health Survey, 8 in 10 Americans believe that you don't need a romantic relationship to be happy. And also, in many ways, they're really not wrong. You absolutely can be happy single. And if you are, more the power to you. As long as you have a strong support system, you have your basic needs met, and you feel like you generally have a purpose to your life, you'll probably find yourself being a pretty happy person regardless of your relationship status. If you find yourself unhappy pursuing romance, then don't try to be someone you're not. Just be yourself and enjoy the single life. I also don't necessarily think that everyone is made for dating or dating around for that matter. Some people are lucky and they marry the first person they date, but others might have a lot of relationships in their lives. And both of them are okay. But if you're one of those people who has multiple partners in a year, or maybe you have a pattern of finding bad partners or the relationships ending in similar ways, then that's another good time for you to consider being single. Being single and rediscovering yourself can be really, really helpful because you need to start considering the relationship with yourself. What's your self esteem? What does the future look like that you want to live? How do you identify yourself? As I said previously, you absolutely can be happy without a romantic relationship. And so you should kind of strive to get there. You obviously don't need to disregard your romance, but if you're able to get to a point of happiness being alone, then once you meet someone who is willing to engage with you romantically, your life will only get better. Relationships are one of the main contributing factors to our happiness, but on the Harvard study of happiness, we actually find that it's not just romantic relationships, but just friendships in general that really are the most important relationships that contribute to our life satisfaction. However, of course, that doesn't mean that romance is useless. Romantic love is still one of the strongest predictors of general well being and health. Even though you don't need a romantic relationship to be happy, it's those who have both platonic and romantic relationships, which are healthy and balanced, that show some of the highest outcomes of happiness as they continue to age. I should also add a disclaimer while we're talking about singlehood and life satisfaction and happiness is that you do not need to be the perfect version of yourself or even necessarily the whole version of yourself to be in a relationship. Sometimes it takes having another special person in your life to change. And constantly chasing this idealized version of yourself and inversely, an idealized version of someone out there, you can be limiting your own growth. You should focus on building a life for yourself and living your own happy individual life, but also keep your romantic options open because love really does come when you least expect it. For the last half of this episode, I now want to be talking about if you do want to date and if you're looking at ways to be a good partner, and also how do you find a good partner. So let's say you're on the market for dating and maybe you're relatively actively looking for another person, or at least you feel strongly about considering another relationship. What are the things that you can do to make sure that you're a good partner? And what are the things that you should do while identifying potential partners? The first thing that you should do always when you're thinking about dating at this age is, do I really want a relationship and am I at least somewhat happy by myself? As I said, you don't need to be your perfect version of yourself. You don't need to be this whole person that everyone has to love and you have an amazing job and you're an amazing person and you've figured out your entire future. But I have been saying it a lot where it's really, really important that you're entering a relationship where you're happy with yourself and your self worth doesn't come from just your romantic relationships. This is really, really important because under no circumstance should another person be responsible for your entire well being. And this is for both of your sakes. Because for them, it's a lot of responsibility and an incredibly heavy weight to put on someone. But for you, it also means that you are your own person. You're fulfilled, you're happy by yourself, and you're an independent person who can be happy with their own space and find joy in things that are not just your relationship. If you only found happiness through your relationship, imagine what would happen if that person left you. If you had all your eggs in one basket and then someone took that basket away, you would be devastated. And we actually see this in the real world. People who put everything into their marriage, they put everything into their lives on just the relationship. And if that relationship doesn't work out, they enter an incredibly depressive phase that can go on for years and years and years. Obviously, relationships are a risk and they do take a level of commitment, and you should commit to relationships fully knowing well, but you cannot place your entire happiness and your identity on just one other person because your world would crumble around you. You need to have your own support system, you need to have your own hobbies, have your own career, and be able to find joy in life around you that isn't just in your romantic life. The second thing is that looks are genuinely important in dating. First impressions matter, but it's also really important because of how you view yourself. If you're unhappy with how you look, then that's just going to make you exude this energy of poor confidence and poor self esteem. I think that beauty standards, especially for women today, are really, really unhealthy. And the way to bypass that is to find a way to balance your personal happiness with your appearance rather than basing it off of someone else's standards. Everyone has their own preferences, and you're never going to be the perfect model. But what matters is that if you're happy with how you look, then you get this kind of self confidence and you get this self esteem where you can start presenting to other people and that you're willing to meet other people because you're not worried about how you look. And the chances are that if you're happy with how you look, someone else is going to be happy with how you look too. There are a lot of people who date even when they're not that confident in themselves, but I think that there's a level of immaturity that comes with that. Because when that happens, you kind of rely on this other person for your self image. And again, this goes back to the thing I was talking about previously. If that person leaves you, now your self worth was kind of contained within them. And you don't feel that good about how you look anymore. And that can be a very dangerous path to go down. But what about traits? What can I do to be a good suitor in the world? Well, a Forbes health survey found that ahead of a first date, it's looks and personality that are about equally as important to a bit more than half of the respondents. However, for those between 18 and 26, only 8% of them say that looks are more important than personality. And instead, 31% of all respondents value personality the most. So, again, having your own personality, being your own happy person, having your own direction in life are things that just make you more attractive. You want to be your own person, not just for your own self worth, but it literally will bring you more dates. Research from Bumble even has more to say about this. So, that research states that more than one third of people are open to dating someone who isn't their physical type, and that more than 6 in 10 Americans are concerned with emotional maturity rather than physical looks. Emotional maturity shows itself in many different ways, whether it be in attachment style or your general emotional intelligence. But ultimately, it comes down to, can you be open? Can you be vulnerable? And can you communicate with me? So, are you someone who is willing to stick through things when things get hard? Are you willing to bring up hard issues and work out things together even when you don't feel like it? So, be really brutally honest with yourself. Can you do these things? Are you the kind of person who is able to have those hard talks with your family? And will you be able to do the same with a partner? So far, we have being your own person, elements of physical attraction, traits like personality, and emotional maturity as major factors for being a good partner. But what should you be looking for in a prospective partner? There's a lot of different factors that come into play here, so we'll jump right into it. So, in terms of a good partner, there's actually only a couple of primary components you want to be looking for. Four of them would be conscientiousness, if they're hardworking, secure attachment style, are they independent and also able to show genuine trust, connection, and vulnerability, life satisfaction, are they happy with themselves, and a growth mindset, are they willing to grow over time? These are all characteristics of someone who's going to be suitable for a long term relationship because you have someone who is willing to be emotionally vulnerable and actually commit to the relationship and work on things. And on the other hand, they're also willing to be their own person. You don't control their happiness and they won't control your happiness. And again, it's really interesting because these are all things that it's really hard to get to know about somebody, especially from things like dating apps. It takes time to get to know someone, their habits, and how they act to truly understand if they're fit for a relationship. I also want to mention that there doesn't seem to be research, at least as far as I know, that proves that shared hobbies are any better or not than non shared hobbies. While there's obviously going to be some lifestyle differences that you can't compromise on, so things like if one of you really likes going out and the other doesn't, then that isn't really something that you can compromise on. However, most hobbies like drawing, cooking, gaming, sports watching, working out really don't have a huge component to do with successful relationships. Obviously, it can be helpful, especially in early stages, because that gives you a connection where both of you might be able to do something to bond over. But strong relationships aren't built on how well you two are able to cook together. Strong relationships are built on meaningful shared experiences and sharing an emotional connection to one another. As long as your partner doesn't hate what you're doing or isn't constantly pushing you to adopt their hobby that you're not interested in, then there's nothing wrong with having different interests. Especially if you're both open minded to trying out new things, then it's actually sometimes a good thing because those non shared interests can be how the relationship stays exciting and loving. Moving on, I want to talk about relationship satisfaction and specifically things that lead to good relationship satisfaction in regards to traits that you can look out for as well as maybe almost incorporate in yourself. So, the first one I want to start out with is the Big Five personality traits. And so, if you don't know what the Big Five personality traits are, it's basically the gold standard for personality tests in psychology. I'd highly recommend reading up on it if you can because it's really interesting. But the main thing that you need to know is that research by Blunt-Vinti and others showed that those who are generally more sociable, hardworking, less prone to anger, and are also willing to communicate and get along with people have higher relationship satisfaction. In Big Five terms, that means someone who has low neuroticism and is high in their conscientiousness, their agreeableness, and their extroversion. To be honest, if you kind of listen to the traits I just said, it probably just makes a lot of sense because I said things like someone who's just more sociable, someone who's hardworking, which also means that they'd work on the relationship, and someone who's less prone to anger. I think these traits, at a blanket statement almost, are something that people would like in the first place. And it makes sense that this would be someone who is also good in relationships. I will add, again, another disclaimer though, is that these individual traits tend to not play a major role in relationships. They're each only related to about 1 to 3% of the variability in relationship satisfaction per personality trait. The largest one of them is neuroticism, because someone who is highly neurotic means that they have difficulty controlling their emotions. Maybe they bottle things up a lot and they won't communicate, or they get angry easily. These things are unhealthy coping mechanisms and can very easily severely damage a relationship in the long term. But even then, that trait is maybe around a 4 to 5% variability change to the relationship. So if you look for these things in people, then they would be maybe a better partner. But don't be so afraid if you're listening to this and maybe you're thinking to yourself that I'm an introvert. That means that my relationships are going to suck. No, it really, really doesn't. Everyone deserves love. And there's a lot of more factors at play for relationship satisfaction. Some other factors which are related to specific qualities in person to person is related to how they feel about themselves and their internal state. And so for individuals, that would be their life satisfaction, negative feelings, depression, and also their relationship attachment style. So what that means is that someone who is more satisfied and happy with their own life, if they have less negative feelings, and also the more secure they are, which means that they're not too avoidant towards their problems and they're also not overly anxious, so they're happy being independent, then those things lead to an individual person being more satisfied within a relationship. Also, kind of a no brainer because, again, I literally listed depression as one of those things. And it makes sense that if someone who is clinically depressed would be less happy in their relationship on a person to person basis. Most notably, though, the biggest predictors of relationship satisfaction are related to the following characteristics to your relationship with a partner. And so that is perceived partner commitment, perceived partner appreciation, sexual satisfaction, perceived partner satisfaction, and the ability for you two to manage conflicts. So these factors all together, those five I just listed, account for around 45% of relationship satisfaction. And so those are the things that you really should be thinking about when you're entering a relationship with somebody. And also, even if you're in a long term relationship or if you've been in a relationship with someone, you should really consider these things and how they make you feel. Do you feel like this person is willing to commit to me? Have they said that? Do I feel like I'm appreciated by them? Do I feel physically aligned with them? Have they told me that they like being around me and that they are happy in their relationship? And if you haven't had the chance to solve serious relationship issues with them, does it feel like that they are able to communicate with you in emotionally mature ways? These are the things that you should be thinking about when you're looking at your relationship and also building relationships with people, because these are the things that truly matter for your relationship satisfaction. Often, what this means is that sometimes you're going to have to objectively look at someone and see if they're meeting your needs. So, again, are they a securely attached person? Does it feel like they can communicate? Does it feel like they can be vulnerable? Do I feel heard? Do I feel safe in this relationship? I feel like I've heard a lot of horror stories from my friends and from people who just deal with partners who are like emotionally closed off in the early stages, or maybe they're really overbearing in the early stages, but then they just ignore it because the love and the relationship and the gifts and everything that comes with it is really, really addicting. And I'm not going to deny their feelings because it makes sense. Love is one of the most addictive things that we have. It mirrors neurotransmitters that come when we actually take drugs like morphine and cocaine. But usually, those early signs that people ignore are also the things that end up breaking the relationship down the line. Even though the early stages of dating can be amazing, if you're genuinely trying to make or have a really lasting relationship, you should be able to and you should be willing to take a deep dive into this person that you're looking at and say to yourself, is this person fulfilling these major components of emotional and physical satisfaction for me? I'll say when you are thinking about potential partners, and especially to the things I spoke about in terms of what makes a good long term partner, so that was conscientiousness and security, those kinds of things, is also think about if you are good at those. So, are you a securely attached person who is satisfied with your life? Do you think that you communicate openly and are able to hold difficult conversations? Do you have your own personal goals and aspirations? Are you someone who works hard and you're conscientious about progressing in both your professional life and committed to improving your relationships? I think it can be really difficult to turn inside and turn inwards and find your flaws because if you're super hypercritical of yourself, then you're never going to get over things. And sometimes, also, from an ego standpoint, it hurts a lot. It can be difficult to see the things that maybe are just like your quirks or your personality and things that are genuinely bad. But sometimes they're just things that you know truthfully you kind of want to work on yourself. I don't want to look for a partner right now because I know that my self confidence isn't that high and I don't want to project that onto a partner. For me, the answer is I wouldn't want to date myself right now. And I think this makes a lot of sense because if I were looking for a partner, I wouldn't really want someone who has confidence issues and needs me to constantly reassure them. Those are things that are not something I would want to do. And I know that I also reflect some of those traits. Now, I also know that there are people with things like obsessions, so idols, pornography, or substance use. And if their partner were to share those same obsessions, they would find that it's really unattractive or weird. On the contrary, though, if you have a couple of habits that maybe some people wouldn't like, but you like and you would like in your partner, then that's also perfectly fine. I know a girl who, I mean, like a lot of people in our generation, she loves Taylor Swift. And for her, she would really, really like to have a partner who actually shares that passion with her. Someone who listens to a lot of Taylor Swift songs and is willing to go to those concerts and do things with her. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But the issue arises when someone has one of these obsessions and then they look at somebody else and they say, oh, this person plays games, I can't have that slide. Oh, this person listens to this idol group, I can't have that slide. The point is, you can have high standards for yourself and you can have standards for your partner, but you should also hold yourself to those standards as well. Otherwise, you and this person are going to feel unfulfilled because one or both of you are living to a double standard. All of that is to say, if you listen to everything that I talked about, you really just need to be your own person. You need to be the person that you want to date. And you also want to be secure in yourself. Have a happy life that isn't just about romance. Date around if you want and learn more about yourself. Learn more about your sociality, learn more about your hobbies, learn more about your passions. This is what develops a truly attractive person. And when you are able to reach a standard for yourself that you're happy with, you're also more likely to meet someone who is just like that. You're more likely to meet someone who is at your level of security, of communication, of hobbies, of joy for life. And so be the person that you want to date, and then love will be the thing that finds you. So, with that, that is everything for this episode. So, hopefully, after listening to this, you feel a bit more informed on what Gen Z is going through while dating, the culture of dating for our age group, how to better yourself as a person in your relationships, and what to look for to build successful relationships. If you enjoyed this episode, please do share it with your friends or your coworkers or whoever else. I really do appreciate the word of mouth. And I also appreciate it a lot if you're able to give the podcast a 5-star review wherever you're on. If you have any episode ideas, be sure to follow the podcast on Instagram and you can message me your idea or your feedback or anything else at Mind of Gen Z podcast. And that's going to be the best place to reach out to me. That's everything for this week. And next Sunday, I hope to see you guys again as we're going to be talking about if Gen Z should be reclaiming what it means to be a hater. Until then, I'll talk to you next week.